Okay, welcome back to our 2024 real estate market forecast for the fifth, sixth, or seventh year. How long have we been doing this, Mr. Carter?
Something like that.
A while. So let me do the proper introduction. Art Carter, CEO of CRMLS. Been a little busy the last couple of months, my friend.
Drinking from the fire hose is the way I
Wow.
put it. Yeah.
Just to set the stage, because we have a lot of people in our audience, Art is what I refer to as one of our industry professionals. I mean, we're doing our market forecast, and we have Chris Thornburg and the economist guys go out and say what they think the world's going to do, and interest rates and transaction volume and prices and all that sort of stuff. But many years ago, and I think you probably were on that very first market forecast that I said, I'm going to bring some industry professionals in to speak maybe not so much to the buyers and sellers and the consumers, although maybe what we're going to touch on today might be of interest to buyers and sellers and consumers. Yeah. But in the past, I never looked at you that way. I always said your focus, or at least my focus with you, was always towards the real estate professional. You know, what's going on in the MLS? What is the associations in the industry doing? But man, okay, so to set the stage, and you're going to get a lot of Art today. I'm going to ask a few questions, but I'm going to let Art go because, so a few years ago, I think we sat down and I don't think I appreciated what you were telling me at the time. You're like, hey, we got some things going on here, some litigation, several lawsuits, and then maybe 2 years ago, you gave me an update, gave our audience an update. And all of Art's interviews, if you want to go back and take a look at them, you can find them on our forecast. I'm fascinated by them. And then a year ago, and I probably started really paying attention 2 years ago, because I'm like, okay, wow. And then a year ago, you're like, hey, better start paying attention. Okay, so I'm going to set up, and by the way, I'll let Art talk about the lawsuits and the litigation and the settlements and what that means for the industry and potentially the consumer, not potentially, how it's going to impact how we interact with the consumer. But I have a trick question to start. Have you been wrong on any of it?
I honest to God wish I had been, but no.
Called it.
It some of it wasn't all that difficult to call. I think most in this industry are probably guilty of wishful thinking.
Yep.
And and Ed Zorn on our staff, we spend a lot of time arguing through these issues, and I just did not see, a solution or a resolution that was any different than what happened.
So you basically nailed it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, for our audience, some of you already know what we're talking about when you see Art Carter over the last 6 months anyway, certainly the last year, or certainly the last 2 months, know exactly what you're talking about. But let's set the stage. So what did you call several years ago, and certainly over the last 12 months? So what's happening?
So, we started calling this with our board of directors 5 years ago.
Okay.
Going through strategic planning sessions, we started really presenting to the board of directors the what ifs and contingency plannings. If this occurs, what are we going to do at the multiple listing service level? How do we handle not having commissions in the multiple listing service? Because that's really what all of this has been about. Right. And in 2018, I testified in front of the Department of Justice and the FTC.
So it's your fault. You started this.
No, the FTC and the Department of Justice started it. Yeah. And, underneath a different administration, I think with different goals in mind at that time. But, it became very clear to me that there was a definitive movement within, some of the government entities that they wanted change in the real estate industry. They had been starting to receive enough complaints at the consumer level that they were starting to pay attention to it, and they wanted to dive into the depths of what was occurring between brokers and what was occurring on the multiple listing service. So kind of called it at that point. I think as a result of that hearing, that is when the lawsuits started to occur in 2019, the first of them, the Morrell case, which is a sell-side case. You got to make sure that there's a delineation between the sell-side cases and the buy-side cases. Okay. But the sell-side case basically asserts that sellers are overpaying for commissions because they are offering the buyer-broker commission through the multiple listing service, and it's a standard offering that goes through. That's their claim.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the Morrell case was not the first one to go to trial. The Sitzer-Burnett case, which was on a rocket docket in Missouri, which basically means that this judge moves about as quickly as he possibly can.
Yep.
And basically brought it to a trial in October of 2023. It was not hard to call that one. It was a trial that was held in front of a jury. It wasn't a judge delivered decision.
Yep.
The jury was going to decide whether or not the plaintiffs were correct and the defendants were culpable. And it was a jury of 6 people, and none of those people could be homeowners.
Yep.
And also the judge had made some decisions on what aspects of antitrust law it was going to be held under. I think I got onto an update in September of last year telling everybody that we were going to lose.
It's coming,
and,
right.
Yeah, to be prepared for whatever that is.
Yep.
And so after that lawsuit, after the decision in October of 2023, it was quickly followed up as a lot of lawyers, when they see blood in the water,
Oh, yeah.
they're looking for their own pound of flesh.
Yep.
And we had 27 copycat lawsuits in total
Yep.
that were filed.
Letters going out, postcards going out.
Yeah,
If you bought
yeah.
or sold a home, call us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sierra MLS was involved in one here in California. So, I think NAR got into a position where it was death by a million, scissor cuts.
Right.
And, a lot of brokerages were named, hundreds of brokerages, and not just the franchisors that were named in the original suits. So it literally was, could be a bankrupting event for a lot of brokerages in this country, just defending themselves.
Yeah.
And so on March 15th, NAR entered into a settlement agreement with the original lawsuit to settle all of the lawsuits. And basically, we've been dealing with the aftermath of what those different settlement terms mean for the industry.
Yep.
And how we're going to move forward.
No, I thought I was seeing. So on this, let's just back up a little bit. So the multiple lawsuits, but this Sitzer, I have a hard time pronouncing it. Sitzer-Burnett?
It's Sitzer. It
Sitzer.
was originally Sitzer, and when it went to trial, it was the Burnett
Okay.
Burnett case.
So commission, sellers overpaying, or at least allegedly overpaying, and then the jury said, yeah, sure, they're overpaying. So, and then with the DOJ kind of looking in from afar, you've got, larger franchises, Coldwell Banker, Anywhere brands that say, hey, we're going to settle, and I think Remax settled,
Yeah.
and a few people said, no, we're going to fight, and then NAR.
Yeah, I skipped over a lot of stuff that
we
happened in
we
between.
did, but I'm again,
September
we've got, maybe got some. I think most of the people who are going to watch you are pretty much up to speed.
Yeah.
So skipping over, I'm maybe doing this more for myself. So anyway, these settlements get in place, and then ultimately we get to the point where it's like, okay, we have to look at the compensation model differently.
Yes.
Okay, sellers, and again, if I'm wrong, help me out because I'm learning all the time. Sellers, in effect, you compensate your agent. Buyers, you compensate your agent, and then we kind of figure out how to deal with that in a reality type situation.
Correct.
Given the fact that our system, for the most part, has been allowing for this seller to kind of bake in that compensation, offer that compensation through our cooperative compensation agreements. That therefore the buyer, in many buyers, certainly not all, hey, I barely have enough money for a down payment and closing cost. How am I going to afford to pay my realtor? So the system that we've had for as long as I've been in the business seems to have worked, but this changes that.
Yes.
Okay, and the Department of Justice as well seems to have a big role in ultimately what this thing is going to look like. So I know Sierra MLS is next week, I believe. By the day is May 23rd, 2024.
Next week.
And one of the changes that, and again, you're spearheading this, and thank God for you and your team, because I've said this off mic. I'll say it in front of God and everybody. I've been following this a lot. You opened my eyes multiple years ago and then really kicked me in the teeth probably a year and a half ago. I'm like, wow, because I trust you, and you've been right. That's why kind of the setup is, have you been wrong about anything? And based upon everything that you've told me, you have been spot on. But as an industry, I think we've done a poor job. I mean, California Association of Realtors, and I don't want to beat up on NAR, but the people I've seen speak to this and kind of lead this, I've always been like, okay, well, that's great, but man, we need to have Art Carter come and get in front of everybody and lead this ship, because there's people in leadership that I don't know that they could explain it very well. So anyway, so having said that, so next week, May 29th, which ironically is the day of our forecast, CRMLS is coming out with something new, and that is the seller concession field.
Concessions and price.
And that's a solution, or is that the solution, or part of the solution to how
It could be the solution.
Okay.
Obviously, there's two aspects of what's going on here. It's the changes at the MLS level, commissions going out of the multiple listing service. That unilateral offer of commission is not going to be in the MLS as of August 13th.
In August.
It'll be gone.
Yep.
And so, you do have the opportunity to offer concessions, which could include a buyer brokerage fee.
Okay.
It cannot be limited only to that within our system, but at least you're communicating to the buyer's agent that there is the capability of at least putting in the offer the ability to
Right.
pay the brokerage
Now,
fee.
what's the
through
logic
that.
behind putting out the concession field now, and stripping out the selling office compensation on August 13th? I mean, obviously you gave some thought to that.
Yeah.
So are we just trying to educate our members as to
A lot
this
of
is
it,
coming?
a lot of it is education.
Right.
We don't control the form side, and CAR is putting out 65 either changes or new forms
Yep.
in June
Right.
25th. That's
Yep.
the date for it.
Yep.
And that
and,
gives
and,
us.
and more than probably 15 of those are somewhat in the commission world.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, recognize that our board of directors just met this past week, and they approved 120 different changes to the rules. We have to remove the word compensation completely out of our rule set and out of our systems.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why we're pushing it out to August 13th. We got a lot of systems work to do and a lot of dependencies, and we want to get the concessions and price field out prior to the forms coming out, because and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus either, but I literally was looking at the forms again to prepare to talk to you, and the residential listing agreement.
Still not right?
It's not that it's wrong, it's complex. I've been doing this for 25, almost 28 years now, and it's the most complex RLA I have ever
That
seen.
first page with all the boxes and
Yeah.
yeah. It's, you
I
think that's going to be the final version, the one that you looked at this morning?
let's just say, at the CRMLS level, we hope not.
Yeah.
The problem with the RLA as it's written right now is it still allows for sharing of it still allows for the selling agent to set the brokerage agent's fee.
Okay.
It still allows for that, and we don't think the Department of Justice is done with us if we continue to push forward forms. It doesn't matter if it's on the MLS or not.
Right.
It's still a sharing of commission in between the brokerage, between a selling brokerage and the buyer's agent.
Yeah. I was talking to Ed Zorn. He did, again, you guys have been on the world tour, and thank you for spending the time to come in, because I'm sure you're being pulled in every different direction. Ed Zorn, he's the chief
VP and General Counsel.
General Counsel, VP and General Counsel, CRMLS, and the two of you have been the champions. He was doing a webinar. I forgot that he moved. He was doing a webinar at Inland Valleys Association. I went there to see him, and I saw him on video, and I called him immediately afterwards. And I think the question he was asking me really kind of tied back to the form is we're going to have a couple of options as a brokerage. And one of those options is going to be, do we continue to kind of do this, my words, not his, like a pass-through of the commission through the brokerage, or are we not going to do that? Are we going to go getting back to the concession field, which seems like that's really where this is going, is it seems fairly clear. The seller now is going to sit back and say, hey, I'm going to offer X amount of dollars in concessions to the buyer, or none, and the buyer can do with those what they choose.
Yes.
I mean, is that an oversimplification of kind of?
That's really what the concessions field
Right.
is meant for.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that gets hammered out, negotiated. One thing I did think was interesting, as trust me, I read your stuff, The one thing we talked about this in my sales meeting at depth, my agents they're like over me on this. Like, come on, Lance, can we talk about something fun? I mean, every sales meeting for me, I'm a little over the top with this. I mean, for months, 50% to 90% of our sales meetings for months have been dedicated to this topic. And I'll talk to other brokers and owners and like, really, you're spending all? I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of important, you know.
Wait till everybody sees the forms.
Well, the forms, but then again, we'll wait till next week. So wait till next Wednesday. So this field's going to pop up. And if they just really don't know what it is or they don't know what to expect, it's going to be Wild West, I think, for a little bit as to what's going to be.
Yeah, and we're doing everything we possibly can to communicate and educate people. I would guess that I probably, between Ed and I and some of the other staff, that we've probably only gotten in between 25 to 30% of our membership to pay attention to us.
Oh, I don't think it's that high. And
well,
by the way, and I don't blame you for that.
Knowing the numbers that have come across, I mean, we've had 2,000 people on webinars. So I think I've gotten a big chunk of people, but nowhere near enough.
Well, but I think your challenge, and again, we have similar challenges. I have 4 offices, a couple hundred agents, and I've got this 95-5 rule of 95% of the agents do 95% of the business. So. Great, that's fine. By the way, that doesn't necessarily mean they're very well informed, but just to use that percentage, getting information to the masses and getting them, I mean, I could email it to them, I can text them, I can talk about it in a sales meeting, and I continually will get, well, what are we doing? I'm like, I've been talking about this for 6 months. But I think the challenge as an industry, and there's nothing I don't think you can do to change this, it's not so much getting it to the agents, it's you've got a lot of broker owners at the end of the day, not a lot. Yeah. All of the broker owners are responsible for this. And if you don't have their attention, and not that I'm special, but you got my attention, it's important, and I've been force feeding this to my people, and I know a significant percentage of my people still don't understand it. I won't name the group because I'm friends, and many of you may be watching this, but I was in a group of brokers a week and a half ago. And these are not small-time players. These are killers in the Southern California marketplace. And we were having this conversation, and it was clear to me 75% of them were clueless. And these are big brokers who have hundreds and hundreds of agents beneath them. But I'm going to comment, and then let's jump back into how this is going to be offered. So the new concession, this is the part that surprised me. I didn't realize this. So I take a listing today. Seller says, hey, I'm going to agree to do a certain percentage or a dollar amount in concessions to the buyer. And I put that dollar amount in there, or that percentage. That is a willingness to do that. The seller is not obligated to do that. I found that interesting as I was reading your 9 or 10 point kind of description. And I said, oh, okay. So obviously it's pretty clear that's ultimately going to get memorialized in contractual documentation. But I could see that could be interesting in that, hey, my willingness was this. I put it in the concession field, and maybe I brought you. I'm oversimplifying this. I understand. I'm a buyer's agent. I have my buyer. I bring you a offer at the price and terms that is in the MLS. I put the supporting documentation out that says, hey, this is how we're going to deal with the number that you put in there, and now that number is not the number. Well, we said we would consider it, but we're not necessarily going to do it. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. So getting back to the CAR forms. So I've been looking at those red line forms, and they're coming out June
25th.
So we're like a month from now.
Mm-hmm.
A month from now. So you don't particularly think the current version of the red line is clear? A little confusing.
It is.
Okay. So we touched on this, and maybe I didn't understand. So yesterday, counsel for DOJ came out and made a statement that says there's more things that we don't like, and part of what, if I understood you correctly, is the memorializing of the compensation. They don't want it in the contract. What did we talk about just a minute ago?
Yeah.
But before we do that, so what happened yesterday? What was the context?
There was a hearing that was held on another case, seller side commission case that occurred in Boston.
Okay.
And that's known as the no select case. And in the no select case, The MLS had settled out of it,
Okay.
and the Department of Justice had put a statement of interest into the judge on that. And there was a hearing yesterday to determine, what the judge was going to do with the Department of Justice's statement of interest and the settlement as it
Okay.
was crafted. And the Department of Justice made a very clear statement that they do not want the offer of compensation to be anywhere but between a buyer and the seller. They don't want it published. They don't want it shared. They don't want any of those elements. And this is just reading, what they've put out there and the statements that have been made. So I've got a concern that we haven't heard the last from the Department of Justice on
Right.
this. It's interesting. The Department of Justice has to litigate to get changes that they want. And, they do have the ability as an entity to put far-reaching, what are called subpoenas out there. They're called CIDs. And I don't think we've heard the last from the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice lost a lawsuit to NAR about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And they appealed that decision, which basically did not allow them to investigate NAR anymore. And so they won on appeal. And since they won on appeal, they have been shooting out CIDs.
They're back.
They're back.
Yeah.
They're back, and they're looking into everything. And our opinion, Ed and I talked about it a little bit this morning, that more of what Jessica Leal was talking about at this case, and she works for the Department of Justice,
And
is
she's the individual that came out yesterday and made
Yeah.
the statement that we're talking about. Okay.
yeah. And so I think more of what they're doing is they're not saying anything to the MLSs. We're getting rid of the compensation field. They're making a statement to the rest of the industry.
Right.
And the statement to the rest of the industry is, we're still watching, and we don't necessarily, you may have removed the commission from the multiple listing service. We think you should remove it from all aspects. And part of the settlement is that you as a broker can display offers of compensation on your website.
Right.
They even definitively said that they're not in favor of that.
Yeah, I don't know that that's going to happen, though. I mean, as a practitioner, I'm sure there's agents that will do
Yeah.
that in one form or another, or brokerages that will make that decision. Part of it, and again, I understand where we're at, but we have a certain amount of efficiency that we've had.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of what we're doing is we're eliminating that efficiency, and we're putting a lot of friction points in that didn't exist. And okay, hey, fine, you got to deal with it. So we're again, in some ways, I don't even want to use the words that I'm thinking, so I'm trying to think this through. But instead of saying, hey, the selling office compensation is X, which is what we've done for decades, that's going away August 13th.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're replacing it with, again, but maybe that's the word I'm not supposed to use, because we're not really replacing it, because that implies that we're just going to shift it from one field to the other.
Yeah, instead of a unilateral offer, you are going into a situation as a buyer's agent where you're going to need to negotiate in the communication, which is the RPA.
Yep.
You're going to have to communicate your demands for, not demands is a bad word, but the requests for compensation on the brokerage side.
Okay, oversimplification. And then I've got again, if I get it wrong, let me know. Okay, so we've got next week, May 29th, the new field coming in, seller's concession to buyer to be used for whatever, closing costs, title, escrow, whatever. August 13th, approximately, compensation field being removed. Bunch of new forms coming down. We'll see what they look like here in a month. Done? Or it doesn't sound like we're done
I don't
now.
And this is where I would rely on my past history
Yep.
to say that I don't think we're done.
We're not done.
I don't think when you see the form, there are it's a checkbox environment on the first page where
Right.
you're checking off whether or not what the selling side is going to receive in commissions. Then you're checking whether or not you're going to be offering the buyer's side any commission that'll be paid to the selling brokerage, and the selling brokerage then would make that payment to the buyer brokerage.
Which is basically what we've been doing for
exactly,
decades.
Exactly.
Right?
And there's there's C3. I'm going off a memory
Yep.
here, but it's just it's a spaghetti trail of figuring out exactly what it is.
So is the part that's not done just the form needs to be cleaner, simpler, and basically more or less comply with?
I think the part that's not done is we have not heard definitively from the Department of Justice.
From the DOJ.
And I think we will.
Right.
I can't tell you we will, but I know I would state with a high level of confidence in the next 6 to 8 months we will hear from the Department of Justice, and this practice of just moving that sharing of commission off the MLS into a form is going to be one of the points of contention that they have.
Right. So if we didn't do the sharing, where again the seller is now offering X amount of dollars to Global Banker, and I'm going to share that, which is basically what we've done. And we still get that's broken. Matter of fact, there's a slide somewhere. I think T360 put out a slide. And on one of their slides, it literally kind of described what I just said and had the big X. It says, no more. None of that. Not going to do that at all. And that's really, that slide would be incorrect then, because we could do that, as opposed to seller says, hey, here's some money to be determined or to be negotiated. It's going to basically be credited to the buyer from the seller, not from the listing brokerage, and then the buyer's going to figure it out. I mean, that's really what the DOJ wants? And then they also don't want it done. They don't want any sort of back channel that says wink, wink, nod, nod. Of course, because that just by implication, wink, wink, nod, nod is we're going around it. But it's going to be the same. We're just going to shift it around. We're going to call it something different. They just truly just want it to be either the buyer's going to pay it directly, period, to their broker, with no seller involvement at all.
The buyer's going to negotiate it directly, and the mechanism that gets paid is still going to be through the transaction.
Right.
But the buyer's the one that has to set that fee. And that's, where the real stickiness and, legally we'll see where the Department of Justice falls with it, because there's some arguments that could be made that, the buyer with a mandatory buyer-broker representation agreement, that's the one thing we didn't talk about, is one part of the settlement is on August 13th. Everybody within the CRMLS system is going to have a buyer-broker representation agreement.
Is that going to, CAR passed a much, it's so interesting. I've always felt, and every time this happens, I think of you. So a year ago, December, 15 months ago, CAR came up with a new RPA, and in the RPA put in that new paragraph about the compensation. And I thought, wow, they have basically caved in to what they think is going to be reality. I thought that was interesting, just from a pure. If I'm a litigator on these cases, I'm like, well, geez, they basically are doing what we've asked them to do, well in advance of a year before basically the case was settled. January or February of this year, before we kind of had more clarity. CR, I'm on the board of directors of California Association of Realtors. And you were at the meeting. I don't know if you were at that meeting, but they passed a motion. We are going to sponsor legislation at the state level to mandate a buyer-broker agreement. I thought, wow, okay. Again, I got no problem with that, by the way. I mean, that's fine. I thought, okay, well, again, here we are, CAR, in effect, acknowledging what Art Carter's been saying for a while. It's coming, so let's sponsor the legislation, which we'd never done before. Matter of fact, we probably never discouraged a buyer-broker agreement, but we certainly never said let's legislate it. Okay, so now whether that works its way through the state assembly and the Senate in California or not really doesn't matter, because August 13th, it's required, period, across the board, which again, I have no problem with that. If anything, I think it helps, because now everybody's working on the same sheet of music. Okay, we gonna be okay?
Yeah.
Everything's gonna be fine?
Yeah, buyer brokerage has value, and the consumer sees that. The use of an agent on the buy side has increased over the last 20 years, and I equate that to the age of the portals. And even though the consumer is a lot more empowered to do all their searches and everything for themselves, they're not doing the transaction themselves. They are increasingly using a buyer's agent. So there's value to that.
It's complicated.
And it is. Yeah. I mean, the thing that always, cracks me up with people who talk about some of this stuff, they've never been through a transaction.
Yeah.
As a buyer, as somebody who's been in this industry for a long period of time, I get to see the good, the bad, and the really ugly.
Yep.
And the fact that there's that really ugly out there in this business,
Yep.
having somebody sitting, at the table for you, who knows the forms, who knows the areas that you're looking at, it's
Right.
hugely important.
It is. Well, you and I talked about, I think it was 3 years ago. You had purchased a property. I had purchased a property. I think this was during COVID, I think. And then our following year interview was like, oh, wow, you bought a house. I bought a house. And I'm paraphrasing, but it just was like, wow, I think everybody needs to do this every now and then, just to know what the price, especially as a real estate agent. Because we just, we do it every day. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we do it every day.
I did it again last April. I'm stupid.
But was it a pleasant experience, Art? Or what did, or
It's as always, it's a complicated experience.
Yeah,
you know?
even the smooth ones.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make a very small unintended mistake that costs a lot of money or changes everything dramatically.
Yeah.
But we're going to be okay. And I think I
Yeah.
say that because I think the challenge I have as a broker owner and an operator is we just need to get through it. We need some certainty. Tell us what the rules are going to be. We'll figure it out. Okay? So it sounds like we're getting closer. Maybe we've got this overlaying uncertainty. The DOJ may come in and tinker a little bit more around the edges, or maybe more than tinker, which means what? Our forms get, it's kind of funny. So why don't they just tell us exactly what they want? Or do we just going to fight them all the way? Or have they already told us exactly what they want and we are fighting them all the way?
I don't really know that they know how to accomplish exactly what they want.
Okay.
And so for them to tell everybody and recognize, the way business is done in each locality, there are some significant differences.
Right.
And so, we've got to take into account those things. But yeah, everybody's going to be okay.
We're going to be fine.
You just need to recognize this is the summer of education.
Yep.
And if you don't look at it that way, my biggest fear is, based off of some of the commercial experiences that I've walked through, Ed and I have talked about, is somebody's going to walk away from an escrow and not get paid.
Yeah.
There is no unilateral offer of compensation.
100%.
And just because some broker or some agent told you that there was an offer of compensation on the phone,
Yep.
if you do not put it in your offer,
Right.
you do not put it, if it's not memorialized in a contract,
Yep.
you're going to get screwed.
It's gonna happen.
And, it's going to be a very painful lesson.
Yep.
And it's one that hopefully people don't have to learn more than once. But it's something that can be, you can educate yourself and not face these issues. But there are going to be people that don't do it.
Well, I think we're going to be okay, but I don't know about everybody's going to be okay. And again, maybe you don't want to comment on this, but I think let's just do winners and losers, and then maybe in between. I think sellers on balance will turn out to be winners. If you want to define a winner, as I truly believe sellers ultimately will be paying less compensation as part of a transaction. I could see that. I may be wrong, and maybe I'm equating it to a current day marketplace where inventory is low and demand is still reasonably high. Which would be, I could take everything back.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in a different marketplace
Yeah.
where demand is low and inventory is high, and a seller says, well, geez, I need to offer a larger amount of compensation. But it feels to me like the sellers may very well end up paying a little bit less than they would have otherwise. It feels to me that super good, high quality listing agents will make more money. I believe that, because I think they will come in and say, hey, here's my value. I can articulate my value. You as the seller may end up paying less on the buy side of a transaction or contributing less in concessions, therefore pay me more. It feels like that could happen. It feels like some buyers will be losers. Whether they are paying some of the compensation now out of their own pocket, or whether they're basically getting poorer representation, because I could see that. I could see the buy side transactions, the buyer's agents, the buyer's brokerages, ultimately not being able to articulate their value. And if you can't articulate your value, well, you're going to have a problem, because you didn't necessarily have to articulate your value under the old set of rules. Your value was established, and it was established by somebody else. The buyer's agent didn't necessarily, now they could have come in and negotiated if they didn't like the fee that was offered in the offer of compensation in the MLS, but most of buyer's agents, okay, well, that's what they're paying, I guess that's what I'm going to get. So if that number is different, I could see that side of the transaction suffering a little bit from a pure compensation perspective. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to be okay.
People will get paid.
People will get paid. Some people might get paid a little bit more. Some people get paid a little bit less. I do find it interesting to see the buy side. Matter of fact, I think this was a discussion that was part of Ed Zorn's, or actually it might have been on the panel that you were on, or one of the many panels I've seen you on. So I'm a buyer, okay? And I turn to my agent and say, hey, I understand this is our agreement for compensation. And I'm like, okay, I understand that, but I don't have that. Therefore, this is my criteria. I'm looking for a 4-bedroom, 2,500 square foot house in the city of Riverside. Here's my price. Oh, and by the way, since I don't have the ability to pay you, I only want you to show me properties where the seller is offering an amount of concession that allows me to pay you. Okay, so what do? We go into the MLS and we search the concession field. Because of my buyer, the buyer said, don't waste my time.
Yeah.
That house might be a better house, but I don't have the ability to pay you. I see value in you, therefore only show me these houses. I thought I heard somebody say that does not comply with the rule, meaning that we're searching compensation, we're steering compensation, and that's not allowed.
It's not that it's not allowed. It's just a risky behavior. Obviously, if that's something that the buyer wants you to do, I'd make sure that I get that in writing from the buyer.
Okay.
There are elements of the matrix system, and for example, for you, that allow you to produce a concierge level of portal experience for them, to where you can keep in and toss out listings that get shown to them if that's their preference.
But if it's coming from the buyer.
If it's coming from the buyer, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that example I gave you wasn't my example. I hadn't even thought about it.
I've heard it before.
Well, I heard it, but then the person answering the question said, well, that would not be allowed. And then the argument went around, which was like, well, that's silly. It's coming from the buyer. It's not an agent who's basically seeking compensation. This is a buyer that says, hey, this is what I'm trying to do.
If you're going to be compensated at this amount, these are the properties that fit that parameter for me.
But those things will work themselves out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll work themselves out. So we're going to be okay.
Yes.
Yes. So we got this big change coming. I think it's a big change. I think the month of June will be very interesting. I actually think the date, May 29th, is going to be interesting, because I'm curious to see how many listings by the end of the day, or how many listings by May 30th, where the listing brokerage has chosen to go in and say, okay, I'm going to use this field today. And maybe I'm going to voluntarily go in and I'm going to switch. I'm going to zero out the offer of compensation. I'm going to talk to my seller, of course, in advance and say, hey, this is what that number would have been. Do we want to shift it over here? I think there's going to be my gut tells me there's going to be a good percentage. I don't know what that is, 50% of the agents and the brokerages that will do that immediately, like next week.
I don't get a sense of what that's going to be. I hope that people have been paying attention enough to really utilize those fields.
Yep.
I don't think we're going to see real utilization of that field until the new forms come out.
So the field's going to kind of sit there, and then the forms are going to come out.
The people will use it, but the forms, which
understood.
There's a paragraph 5 on the front page where
of the residential listing agreement.
Residential listing agreement that talks about seller's concessions.
Okay, so paragraph 5, assuming it stays paragraph 5, that basically would address that field.
Yeah.
So right now it's not addressed. So in theory, if my summary is going to be correct, the listing brokerage would need to sit down with the seller and say,
Yes.
hey, this form's coming in 3-4 weeks. Our brokerage recommendation is we shift it now. So we'd almost have to come up with some sort of a supplement if we wanted to keep our paperwork straight.
CAR's thought about that. So they've come up with a form that will transition you from the old RLA to the new RLA that basically includes a lot of the language that's on the front page.
But is that coming out on March?
Same thing.
But is that coming out on May 30th, or is it coming out
on June 25th.
Okay. Well, I still think there's going to be some brokers that'll do it regardless of the form. I think it's regardless. I mean, I'm curious. I'm like not excited, but I'm like, okay. We've talked about this in our office, and I don't know if we're split down the middle, but there certainly are agents that are like, yeah, why not? Let's get it over with. Let's just jump in. And then there's others, I don't know, why let's just forget about waiting until June or June 25th. Or let's wait until August 13th. And then at that point,
Yeah.
I guess by then we'll have it all figured out. Okay, Art. Okay, so what's the prediction? Are we going to be what are we going to be doing next year? 2025 market forecast. Are we going to be saying, hey, we made it through and we finally got a new set of rules and we're completely comfortable with where we are, even though we might not have liked how we got there? Or a year from now, are we still going to be having some uncertainty on this topic?
I think it'll all be determined by then. Hopefully, this time next year, you're talking about interest rates going down and the market making a definitive turn around a corner.
Right.
Looking in hindsight, hopefully it'll be kind of the same thing as when we got through COVID and how am I going to show a house and how do I get these, these forms signed and
so this
paper
issue
everything. Generally
will be behind us.
I believe so.
And it materially will look kind of like what we're expecting with a couple of DOJ's little hammer tweaks.
I think so.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel good because, it's been I said 3 years. You had said you've been preparing for this at the board of director level at CRMLS for 5. So maybe we're at the end of the road. Okay.
We're hoping.
Yeah.
We're hoping.
And we're going to be okay. I don't know if this is the best way to wrap it up. And again, I may have a faulty memory. Mark Dowling, I believe, is projecting a decrease in membership of a percentage. I think I've heard you. I know you're conservative and you got a business to run, so it would be silly for you not to financially prepare for forget about the lawsuits or any liability stuff. But if membership falls, what does that mean for CRMLS? Is that something you can publicly say? Are you preparing for that? Or
yeah, we've been preparing for it for the last 2 years running.
Okay.
Especially as the market turned. We've lost about 10% of our membership size over the last 2 years.
10%.
10%, and I would suspect.
And what is that membership size? What's
it was
the total
110, our high water
so now
mark.
you're about 100.
So yeah.
Okay. And what do you think is going to happen as a result of this, or over the next year?
I think it will have an effect. We're looking anywhere between 7 to 10% of a natural turnover at that point.
Yeah, and you think that's because of this or just market conditions?
Market conditions.
Market conditions. This transaction volume is just horrible.
This is complex, but once people train on it, once people understand the concepts, once people understand that it's going to flow through the loan process the same way, it's going to all this stuff is going to occur. It's just different forms, different boxes to check. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah,
different communication, definitely a higher level of communication.
Well, I think you're going to have to articulate your value and actually have value.
Yeah.
Because one thing you can't articulate value if you don't have it, and if I fake it, my consumer is going to realize pretty quickly, wow, this guy's full of beans. He doesn't have it.
And this may be bad for me to say, but I'll be honest with you. Some of the bigger complaints we get at the CRMLS level is, especially on the buy side, is buyers agents who aren't doing their best by their buyers.
They're
and
horrible.
I hope at the end of the day, because I've been involved in transactions where the buyer's agent has done diddly squat and having to fill in, even myself as the homeowner for them. I hope some of that gets driven out of the industry.
Well, I'm sure there's a couple of my own agents that listen. You just said buyer's agents maybe not doing their job, and I said broad brush, they're horrible. Okay, that's not fair. There are some fantastic buyer's agents out there. There are some horrible listing agents out there. But as an industry, forget about whether the DOJ has any argument as far as any sort of antitrust, and maybe it could have been done differently, and maybe agents didn't articulate things as they should. Standard commissions, and this is how it always is. And if you don't do that, no one's going to sell your house, and all of these things that we've been coached and trained on for years. Don't say that. That's not, But as an industry, we've had a professionalism problem for a very long time. I can remember being a young CAR director. I'm 24 years old. This is 1995-ish. Art Carter, excuse me. Walt McDonald was the president of the California Association of Realtors that year, and I was the incoming president of the Riverside Association. I may be wrong. You can fact check this, but I think at that time there was 100,000 maybe 110,000 realtors in the state of California. This is 35 years ago. Okay. Now I think that maybe 400,000 licensed real estate agents, but only 100,000 dues-paying CAR members. And I don't remember what the transaction volume was, but I think we actually were doing more transactions
Probably, yeah.
back at that point with 100,000 agents than we're doing today. So today CAR has about 230-ish thousand.
Ish, yeah.
So more than double the number of realtor members in 35 years. Fewer transactions, higher sales prices, I understood, but fewer transactions. But anyway, 35 years ago, I'm like, the level of professionalism back then was, I'm a new agent. I didn't know anything, and I recognized that we got some bad actors. So this hopefully fixes that, but I don't think that it will. I still think it's a 95.5 thing.
I don't think it will either.
It won't.
It's unfortunate, but I think there's some additional work that this industry has to do.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So the again, I said it 16 times already in my 95.5 rule. But I don't think it's going to be a 95.5 rule. I think it's going to be more of a 96.4 rule or a 97.3 rule, basically meaning there's going to be a very tight, small group of real professionals, real killer agents, some of them teams, some of them otherwise, who will just be able to articulate that value, will do well, and then a very large percentage of just, I don't like to put it this way, but almost kind of like hanger-ons. They're just, hey, I'm here, I got my license, I go to the office, had a cup of coffee. Yeah. It was really hard work today at home or at the office, honey.
Yeah.
So anyway, but we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. So this is my takeaway with art. A year from now, this is going to be settled, and we're going to talk about stuff. We might not even have you back next year. You know what?
Finally.
You may not be necessary by this time next year.
Finally.
You can take that vacation and just relax. No, well, we're definitely going to have you back next year, but maybe we'll talk about something different. We'll talk about some technology stuff or something, which, by the way, goodness gracious, you guys are doing some pretty cool stuff on the technology
AI,
side.
I don't think, people are so focused on the lawsuits. They're not focused enough on AI.
Right.
They're not focused enough on some of the technological things that are happening, and the speed of the game out there is changing dramatically.
Yep. But you guys are in that game. Yeah. And just in the last 5 years, again, I'll speak for myself. I've seen on the peripheral some of the things that you've done, technologicals, and some of the products and services, and the new dashboard. I forget the name of the RE Center.
RE Center Hub. Yeah.
RE Center Hub. And I saw it coming, and I've heard you speak about it. Matter of fact, I've heard you say, hey, first we're going to talk about RE Center Hub, and then we're going to talk about the lawsuit. And you guys are doing a lot of really cool stuff, so maybe that'll be our focus next year.
I hope so.
Talk about all these cool tools.
I hope so.
Okay, guys. Art, thank you, my friend.
I appreciate it.
All right, so this video will post before our event. So you'll be watching this before May 29th. We're going to be live at Cal Baptist University. We'll be starting at 9. We'll run till 1-ish or so. The normal economic stuff. I've got Chris Thornburg speaking. I've got a wonderful guy coming over from PRMG, who's their capital markets guy. His name's escaping me. Goodness gracious, we'll have to fix that later. I've got Assemblyman Bill Asaley coming as well, and you'll get a little bit of me. And then a bunch of industry pros on video with content all over. So we hope to see you next Wednesday, May 29th, for our 2024 real estate market forecast. Art, once again, thank you, my friend.
I appreciate the time.
All right, appreciate you, as
Thank
always.
you.
All righty.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one.